Welcome back, viewers, to Meta Monday with the Mountain. This is the July 10th edition of this. So this was recorded on July 9th. Again, as we talked about last time, the disclaimer, I know as it stands right now, we only have 102 cards, but I still feel like there are opportunities to learn and grow from this experience. And all my experiences are played on Pixelborn. The cards are just coming out too fast for us to print them out and play in person. So Pixelborn is a really efficient way of just grinding a bunch of games. What has happened this week? Well, let's start at a glance. The biggest thing that happened this week is obviously Tinkerbell was released. Tinkerbell Giant Fairy. We've gone over her before, but I'll say it again. She's a 6-drop, inkable, 4 strength, 5 willpower, 2 lore, can be shifted for 4 onto what is now only the 3-cost Tinkerbell. But the biggest thing that she does is that she has an area of effect, an AoE damage, where she comes into play, deals 1 damage to the entire board. That would be enough. It's actually not even the entire board. It's just your opponent's side of the board. That would be enough. On top of that, she has, whenever she banishes an opposing character in a challenge, she can then do 2 damage wherever she wants to another character on your opponent's side of the, actually to any opposing characters. This is only when challenging on your turn, so it's very similar to Aladdin. But the best thing that you can do with her is if you shift her onto the smaller Tinkerbell that exists right now, she essentially has Rush for the turn that she comes into play. So getting off that second ability is completely game-changing. She is a huge source of virtual card advantage. That AoE spread 1 damage a lot of times is enough to clear out your opponent's side of the board, because a lot of what's happening in the game is jockeying for a position where, a 2-3 will take out a 2-2, a 3-3 will take out a 2-2, a 3-4 will take out a 3-3, and a lot of times they're left with 1 willpower remaining. She just comes in and clears the board of them, only on your opponent's side. So she's completely changed the game and what you can do, and as I've seen right now, has really pushed control and mid-range strategies to the forefront over aggressive strategies. She's really pushed that ahead. She has really helped. Last time I talked about playing for the board over rushing for lore. She's just made that even better and even more pronounced. And I will say, as the game stands right now, card advantage remains king. So not only is she a source of both pure card advantage when she actually takes out cards because of her powerful stats and powerful abilities, but she's also virtual card advantage because they typically want to run a bunch of cards into her. So she winds up creating additional card advantage, not only out of hand and board, but as the game goes on as well. The 3 cards below also create card advantage. Stitch Rockstar is still a powerful deck that can actually get around a lot of what Tinkerbell is trying to do, because they don't really care if they're losing characters. They just want to flood the board, and as soon as Stitch comes out and get lore. But I will say the ability to get him off the board with the extra damage and the extra spread damage is much increased with Tinkerbell, so he is more dangerous, more easily taken out for other reasons I'll get into later. We still have 3-cost Maleficent Sorcerers as a example of pure card advantage, and I still believe Friends on the Other Side is the best card in the game, and remains a huge source of card advantage as well. So what are the domino effects of Tinkerbell existing? Well, number 1, there's more steel in the metagame. So what does that do? Well, first of all, Tinkerbell alone means 1 willpower characters are just bad. In my opinion, I see a lot of people still play things like Pascal and Maleficent biding her time. To me, those cards are just completely unplayable at this point. Tinkerbell shows up in, I'd say, about 80 to 90% of games I've played. I don't care what advantage you're gaining with them. They're eventually going to get off the board for absolutely no cost, and you're going to be left with no cards in your hand. The game just doesn't have enough card draw right now, and I'm not really sure in the end it's going to make up for losing too many of those 1 willpower characters. Guaranteed as the game goes on. Again, that comes into play with the very generous mulligan that Lorcana offers. So with steel in the metagame, you also have other damage being brought in. So you have Fire the Cannons and Smash, for example, which, again, in the long run means the 2 damage removal from Fire the Cannons, it means that 2 willpower characters are bad. And even 3 willpower characters, I mean, I'm not going to say you shouldn't play any of these, but you have to understand that it's a lot easier to get these characters off the board, and you cannot rely on them any longer than you used to. A Fire the Cannons plus Tinkerbell will take out the 3 willpower. A Tinkerbell plus Smash will eventually take out the 4 willpower, etc. And there's other ways to complement that. The other thing about Steel being so prevalent in the metagame is Fire the Cannons with Captain Hook. So throughout the game, you're simply doing damage almost every single turn. Like if you fire the cannons early, smash early, Captain Hook gets it back. Like there just aren't a lot of ways for characters to stay in play. And it's okay to, quote, waste your fire the cannons early because a lot of times you're just going to get it back with Captain Hook. The fact that she is inkable means that you can run more of these uninkables in your deck. Same thing with Smash. So Smash and Tinkerbell both being inkable will make up for the fact that Fire the Cannons and Captain Hook are not inkable. And Captain Hook is just another huge source of card advantage. Again, Tinkerbell's 2 abilities will help. That 2 damage from Fire the Cannons, Tinkerbell's 2 abilities will basically just allow you to do the extra damage you need to take other characters off the board. So with more Steel in the metagame, you just have to be aware of this, that your characters just aren't safe from direct damage type abilities and removal, and just play accordingly. So cards that are rising in value because of Tinkerbell and because of the metagame this week that I've seen are, of course, the 3-cost Tinkerbell. Being able to shift onto her as well as having 4 willpower for 3 costs means it's very difficult to take her out. There are very limited ways to do it that exist right now that allow you, and by playing her early and eventually shifting the 6-cost Tinkerbell onto her for 4, you're, again, as I mentioned earlier, you're giving that 6-power Tinkerbell in shift, essentially. You're giving her rush, basically. The small Simba, which I was not a fan of last week, has, to me, become, I don't want to say a necessary evil, but he really helps out the consistency of these decks that run Tinkerbell. Not only does he help you find her, he can actually help you find the combo of 3-cost Tinkerbell into 6-cost Tinkerbell from shift, but he also just smooths out your curve in terms of the number of uninkables that you are forced to run. So as I mentioned before, you're going to be running Fire the Cannons and Captain Hook, so that's already a start. But beyond that, you're probably going to be running uninkables in your other color as well. So he helps you sift through a lot of that and get you to inkables. He still remains like a terrible character in combat, so you just have to be aware of that. But to me, he's one of the better options you can play purely out of Steel. And I even run him in Steel Amethyst, which has its own card draw, but I still think he's a powerful effect as it stands right now. Beast Mirror has really gone up in value as well. Again, this has to do, again, with that Steel effect. You inevitably do run out of cards in this game, as we talked about in the past. A card advantage is king. And to me, Beast Mirror is just more efficient than Magic Mirror because it can be inked, as well as it just draws a card cheaper. You can obviously, ink a card, draw a card very often. So a lot of times it's basically just allows you to draw a second card and continue to build up your ink count. That's really important for some of the non-Amethyst versions of Tinkerbell decks, especially like Ruby, Emerald, and Sapphire. The next 3 cards are all Amethyst, which I feel like right now, obviously, Amethyst Steel is the best combination. So your rushers like Rafiki and Zeus have both gone up in value because, again, the spread damage that Tinkerbell offers allows you to gain a huge advantage if she's in play and is able to challenge. Having rush characters as well put pressure on your opponent, just put you in a situation where you can usually run a rush character into something, and then she finishes off that character, and she's able to spread that extra 2 damage to something else. So just having constant threats that come into play and immediately can challenge is very important. I find that she really helps make up for the deficiencies that Zeus has. Although I talked about last week, some of those, it's really not that big of a deal, but she really does help that. The last one is Elsa. So again, a lot of games degenerate into, well, Tinkerbell hits the field, whether she's played for 6 or played for 4 on top of the other Tinkerbell, and then your opponent just stops. So they don't want to challenge with anything. They don't want to quest with anything because the amount of card and virtual card advantage that she gains by being able to challenge them as a 4/5 and then spread that 2 damage somewhere else is just too great for them to overcome. So a lot of times they usually start to fill, if they can, they fill the board with larger characters that she can't actually get to because they're not exerted. Well, that's where Elsa comes into play. Elsa with Tinkerbell is the equivalent of Elsa with Seven Cost Aladdin, Elsa with like just giant guys in general. And she obviously combos with these 2 other Amethyst cards, which she has in the past. But with Tinkerbell now, I feel like she just has so much more value because you can no longer hide from Tinkerbell when Elsa's in play. So I feel like between Elsa, Maleficent Sorceress, and Rafiki, those are just the premium 3-drops that exist right now. So to summarize, for me, these are the cards really rising in value from the Tinkerbell effect. So you have the ability to shift onto the smaller Tinkerbell, Simba that sifts to get you cards, Beast Mirror, which allows you to maintain threats in the late game once you're out of cards in hand, and then the Amethyst, which I feel like is the best version of the deck right now, trio of Rafiki, Zeus, and Elsa really continue to put that pressure on your opponent in their own unique ways, and throughout the curve. So they can gain card advantage throughout the curve. So what are the cards underachieving? Well, I'm going to leave on here from last week 2 of my least favorite cards in the game right now, which are Cheshire Cat and Prince Eric. Given the situation right now, especially with, if you think about it logically, with that Rafiki, Zeus, and Tinkerbell herself, along with all the other like Smash and all the other removal, these cards just don't do anything anymore. I'm not a huge fan of the smaller Captain Hook either, because I'm not really a huge fan of 1-drops in general, given what I've shown you is the cards that I think are rising in value. But at least the small Captain Hook can, is only a 1-drop and can swing it for 3. Eric is a 2-drop that swings for 3. So the chances of actually being able to get any value out of him are a lot less than just having that Captain Hook in play. As I started off, Pascal and Maleficent biding her time, to me, have just dropped in value tremendously. I still see players running a lot of these in their decks, even in their Tinkerbell decks. I just really don't see the point. I can understand Maleficent in certain versions of the deck, especially when you're going first. She can probably gain you, like, if she gains you 4 or 6 allure, I guess she's in the end worth it. But anytime in the mid and late game when you draw her, she's just going to be pretty much just Tinkerbelled away. Like, I don't see the point of playing a character that only has 1 willpower and no ability to get around that. Same thing with Pascal. The other thing with Pascal, though, is it's a lot easier with a lot of these rush characters that are out there to get around his ability anyway. You just challenge the other characters, use Tinkerbell on the other characters, and you get to Pascal anyway. Even if he didn't just immediately become banished by her AoE spread damage, you can get around his upside regardless just by getting to the other characters. The other standout decks that are out there beyond Tinkerbell are good versions of Stitch Rockstar, especially when played well, and the new Simba, besides being like the cutest card in the game, in my opinion, is a huge addition to that. It protects Stitch Rockstar when you have him come into play exerted to be able to use his bodyguard ability and draw a card. So I find that deck outside of Tinkerbell decks is still very powerful. The other deck that was really popular earlier in the week before Tinkerbell got spoiled was Emerald Sapphire. There was a lot of different players trying to work on different versions of it. And when Merlin was released, he gave them a more premium 4-drop than other ones they had. A lot of them were playing like the 4-drop blue Sapphire Maleficent that has 2 willpower. Merlin still allows smaller characters to trade way up the curve. The problem is those smaller characters, a lot of them are dealt with through Tinkerbell. And Merlin himself is pretty easily dealt with through Tinkerbell and spreads that advantage. Genie is still a very powerful card. Obviously, like, with him having evasive and he's very powerful. He's also very powerful in Ruby Emerald decks. Again, the problem is as Steel becomes more popular, he's still ultimately at the end of the day a 6 cost 3/4, which means if you have any characters in play that Tinkerbell can challenge, he's just going to be banished by her ability and a Fire the Cannons, which is going to happen more like very often. I still think you should play him, but just be aware he's no longer like as easily of a win condition as he once was. So again, in summary, there are other decks to play. I don't want to say that this is simply a Tinkerbell meta, although she is very dominant in it. Stitch Rockstar is still a very powerful deck. You must learn how to play it efficiently. Don't ever put your Stitch into challenge range. Keep yourself, understand what you're supposed to do on each turn of the game. And I think it's a very powerful deck because it doesn't really care when its characters get benched. So it just refills the board every single turn and swarms you with lure gainers anyway. And a lot of them have 2 willpower anyway, so you don't really care. But the thing to keep in mind again is she is going to be able to challenge somebody and spread that 2 damage over to Stitch. So you have to be aware of what do I do? Like, what do I do if they also have a smash? Then you're kind of just out of it. But if you play it efficiently, I think it's still a powerful deck. And there are other options to play. Genie is still a star in terms of evasives that are out there. Just be aware of what the dangers are of having those 4 willpower characters with all the steel removal that's out there. So what am I playing? Well, here's the decks that I'm running right now. I won't go into it too heavily. You can take a look at the screen. The one thing I want to point out, this is my version of Tinkerbell Control Steel Amethyst that I run. The one thing you'll notice is there's no Sorcerer Mickey Broom combo. I just find nowadays, I feel like that combo is just kind of underwhelming. Both cards kind of do nothing without the other. So I have to have both of them. I am running into some of the numbers of some of the smaller characters are changing here and there all the time. But this is the general shell that I'm running currently in terms of Amethyst Steel. The other deck I really like is Ruby Steel Big Eye Control. So the way I found to combat Tinkerbell and her effect on the metagame is simply to go larger. And I don't think there's a better, larger character right now at her cost than Cerberus. She does not trade into Cerberus. She fears Cerberus big time. So I find him to be a huge way of combating her. And again, like I play for board advantage, so he's very powerful there. And I'm very big on the Ruby endgame. I've won a lot of games with Mickey Mouse, Brave Little Tailor, and I've gotten Maleficent out multiple times. I know there's not as much card draw on this deck. I used to run a lot of Ruby Amethyst, so I'm hoping that there is some minor card advantage that comes out of Ruby and Steel to smooth this out. But you really don't find yourself like having problems inking, and you have extra removal from Dragonfire, Maleficent, and so on and so forth. The one thing I will say with this deck is you can't be afraid to, a lot of times you're basically down double-digit lure values. Like I've come back from games of like 12-0, 14-0, because of how powerful 7-drop Aladdin is in getting you back into games and just not only controlling the board, but also just like making your opponent like not be in a favorable position to challenge any longer, especially when you start to whittle down the board with all the removal that you have. So where are we at with our current ink rankings? Well, number one, to me, still remains Amethyst. It still has all the card draw, so on and so forth. It's still the best pairing with Steel, which is our biggest riser of the week. I think it went from like, in the 3rd tier to a 1st tier. So to me, these are the 2 tier 1 ink colors. They are the basis for any deck that you're typically running in the meta. The next tier is Amber. Again, Stitch Rockstar, Stitch Surfer. These are decks that can be run heavily Amber. So when I make these rankings, are about where can these inks wind up as the primary color, and Amber still winds up as a powerful primary color that is supplemented by other colors. So the 3rd tier is Emerald by itself. So it still provides a lot of value in terms of support, in terms of a lot of the cards that send characters back to your opponent's hand. So it's really good for certain advantage. It's also very key in the evasive deck that's out there. So it winds up forming the basis of multiple versions of decks. So as a support color, it's very powerful. It just doesn't have enough to be a primary color as it stands right now. There just aren't enough cards still there for it. The next tier is your support tier. So I'm sorry, Emerald is in the support tier with Ruby, which, as I showed you earlier, I personally love Ruby as a support tier. It just doesn't have enough cards to be the primary, although you can now run Emerald Ruby evasives, which has come out too. And last is still Sapphire, in my opinion. It really hasn't gone anywhere, and it really still needs a lot of help. These are where we stand right now. Again, Steel is the biggest mover. I still feel like Amber can still play it on its own. Emerald and Ruby remain the support tier, and Sapphire, to me, still needs a lot of help. I'm not really sure how many cards we have left to spoil, but it could use help from here on out. That's it for this week's Meta Monday. Please, as you know, we're still doing our Disney 100 contest to Disney 100 sleeves for every 100 subscribers we get up to 1,000. So we have 9 more to give away. So the one thing I want to know is, how is your gaming gone this week? Have you played it all? What have you found? And specifically, what other have you tried to pair Tinkerbell with other color combinations as the week has gone on? Thanks, guys. See you next week.